Hello and welcome to A History of Caged Violence, the web series that shines a light on the dark days of MMA. It is I, your host, the Jay Shot, and we're carrying on today right where we left off. We're headed for the not-so-greener pastures of UFC 2, and spoiler alert, they definitely didn't completely figure this sport out in the short 4 months between events. UFC 1's man in the field Brian Kilmeade gets to pull up a chair and take over hosting duties. If you were hoping for Bill Wallace again, and let's face it, who wasn't? It's a bit of a blow, but never fear, this panel is still as clueless as any. Kilmeade gets right to it, ensuring everyone is up to speed and knows the incredibly subtle differences between the inaugural event and what he calls the Ultimate Fighting Championship 2 or Part 2.
Number 1, instead of 8 fighters, we have 16 fighters. Number 2, there is no 2. Round 2, that is. No round 2, no round 3, no round 4. There wasn't last time. This time, don't wait for a bell.
Now that that's cleared up, he's able to introduce returning commentator Jim Brown, who's back to ensure someone anyone's actually heard of before is involved in the show. He then introduces famed Hollywood stuntman Ben Perry, a martial artist, terrible haircut recipient, and student of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And believe me, he'll make sure that last fact is hammered home over and over again. Speaking of being repetitive, while introducing interviewer Herb Perez, Kilmeade goes back to the well and uses one of his lines from UFC 1. I guess due to it being so incredibly astute, it deserved repeating.
One thing we do know is where it will take place, and that'll be in the ring. But I use that term loosely because it's not a ring at all.
Well, Brian, you're right. It's not a ring, really. It's an octagon.
I don't know, maybe say that then? Why is that so hard? As mentioned before, UFC 2 saw twice as many fighters, although if you tuned in on pay-per-view, you didn't actually see half of them. 7 of the 8 preliminary fights had already finished before the broadcast even started. Good thing hype man extraordinaire Ben Perry is here to ensure fans' interest is peaked to the max.
Scott Morse is the ninja. We didn't know a whole lot on him because he is a ninja, so that speaks for itself.
Kilmeade gets a little tripped up, likely by a combination of trying to remember the previous half-dozen fights, all while properly pronouncing names from all over the world. Although it's possible the shirtless guy who keeps popping up in the back might have thrown him off just a tad.
And you talk about Frank Hammaker. Did I skip ahead? No, I didn't. Frank Hammaker and Thaddeus Luster. Thaddeus Luster, we love his name, but he is out of the competition.
With the audience keyed up, the first televised bout is ready to go down. Returning champion Royce Gracie is matched up against Japanese karate master Minoki Ichihara, who strolls to the cage with icy determination. Although they say it was a random draw, taking on Gracie was the sole reason he flew across the planet. What a badass.
I saw Royce Gracie win last year. He looked dangerous. I thought to myself, I would like to fight this dangerous man.
Not bad for a guy the event lists as 5'7" and later 5'8". No matter which is accurate, he's still the smallest competitor. Not that Royce is much bigger, but as Ben Perry will tell you, size matters not to the Gracies.
He's been training against 600, 700-pound guys. Check this guy out.
Now, I don't typically watch My 600-Pound Life, but I've seen a few episodes, and strangely, none of the subjects ever mentioned being recruited as training partners for the Gracies. It's only early, but already it's becoming pretty obvious that Ben Perry is one of those guys that never lets the truth get in the way of a good story. Returning as the not a ring at all announcer once more is Rich Goins, who they are now calling the G-Man. Bruce Buffer has been labeled the veteran voice of the Octagon. Rich Goins, simply the G-Man. Fitting.
Welcome back from Brazil, Royce Gracie! Gracie!
For some reason, the G-Man now says every fighter's last name twice. Since it wasn't part of his routine the first time around, the best I can assume is he's giving the fighter's second name a second reading because it's the second UFC. Wow, I mean, if that's actually it, that's pretty stupid. Just trying to find some sort of connection with the number 2 just for the hell of it. Well, actually, it's pretty common with boxing announcers. What did I just say about shoehorning in the number 2? Take a hike. This isn't a Double Mint commercial. There's a very brief feeling out process before the defending champ takes down the newcomer. Perry wastes no time dominating the commentary, speculating on Gracie's every move.
What he'll do is he will grind this into his face and neck, and Ichihara will release that left hand, just like that.
Perry basically never stops talking, all the while insisting Royce will end it by a choke and certainly not an armbar. Then when he wins by armbar, well, he just acts like he called that from the beginning.
Royce does not want to win this with an arm lock. If I know Royce, he's going to go for the choke. But I think he's going to let him turn and go for the choke.
Was that an arm lock?
Yes. No. I think he choked him out. I couldn't tell. Oh! He did. Arm lock. Probably popped the capsule in his arm. I thought that would happen.
With the preliminary round complete, Kilmeade runs down the quarterfinals. He explains that due to an injury, Frank Hamaker has withdrawn from the contest and the first ever alternate will be entering the competition. To say he was prepared for this moment might be a slight exaggeration.
This looks like a Chinese word I've never seen before. Can you pronounce that?
Rather than at the top of the broadcast, it's now time to profile the various martial arts. They run through karate fighters punching, kicking, even breaking bricks, to kickboxers like Orlando Veet smashing pads held by one very tough female, to kung fu, okay. Then on to grappling with a nice triple suplex sequence, and then what they've dubbed the exotics. One fighting style that couldn't look less functional, and another that really just looks like the goal is to beat the face off the other guy while snarling loudly. That man is Scott Morris, and he's up first in the quarters taking on returning fighter Patrick Smith, and he came to win. Don't believe me?
We came to win.
See? Unfortunately, those plans don't exactly pan out though. Patrick Smith is back, and he's coming for that $60,000 prize hard. In just 20 seconds, arguably the worst beatdown in the history of human beings has been administered. Smith is now headed for the semis and Morris the hospital. The winner then explains he's adapted his training since UFC 1 to become a more well-rounded fighter.
I've been working on my ground fighting just a little bit, not like I should.
Continuing with the emphasis on martial art versus martial art, Kilmeade tees up the next one and perhaps thinks if he changes the way he pronounces the word, that'll somehow make it totally different.
Karate versus karate.
Johnny Rhodes is out first, and the commentators talk about the disadvantage he's facing. Not only has his opponent not yet had to compete, but Rhodes himself has already had a long night, fighting a 12-minute war in the prelims.
Well, that's something to tell your grandkids. I was in the longest bout in the history of the Ultimate Fighting Challenge. So, if nothing else, he did that. So he's in the record book.
Search that same record book, and you'll find Fred Edish, the UFC's first alternate. It isn't likely the pages say much else about him, though. Kudos to him for stepping inside the octagon, but when you promote an event as pitting the toughest men on the planet against each other, is Fred Edish actually on that list? Seriously, just take a look at him. It's like they slapped a gi on the guy selling popcorn. A 5th degree black belt? Was it a correspondence course? Early on, Rhodes rains down on him with strikes before squeezing him into a bulldog choke. At this point, the last-minute entry calls it a day, and we've seen the last of Fred Edish inside the octagon. Not outside of the octagon, though, as he has to awkwardly wait behind Rhodes while he does his post-fight interview, all beaten up and nowhere to go. On to the next, it's the smaller kickboxer Orlando Veet against the bigger grappler Remco Pardieu. It's only UFC 2, but you can already guess how this'll end, especially when Pardieu has a goal set firmly in his sights.
I'm competing in this event to get the first prize.
Pardieu throws Veet down after a quick feeling out and puts all of his 260 pounds on the much smaller fighter. Despite being an exceptionally talented kickboxer, Veet's out of his element here and gets dispatched quickly, right after Perry and his crystal ball predict the exact opposite.
Orlando is so quick and so clever. I think he'll be out of this pretty soon.
Props to Pardieu for recognizing Veet was out and not really delivering any more punishment. He then talks to his coach, UFC 1 finalist Gerard Gordeau, and gives a post-fight interview where he says he didn't expect to win. Perry compliments his strong technique while Kilmeade temporarily decides he's in charge of comic relief.
It's unbelievable. So is the technique of the ring card girls, I understand.
The last quarterfinal fight sees young kung fu practitioner Jason DeLucia up against Gracie, a return bout to a match they had 2 years prior that the jiu-jitsu master won easily. Rightfully so, the commentators estimate DeLucia's chances are that of a snowballs in hell.
All the Gracies have said they really respect Jason and what he's accomplished so far. They love his attitude, they love his willingness to learn other arts.
That means that they're going to get him out of there quick, huh?
Brown's prediction proves true, as it only takes Hoyce about a minute to transition from guard to mount and into an armbar just as DeLucia thinks he's making his escape. Perry immediately diagnoses his arm as broken, and Kilmeade explains how that probably made his day.
He loves fighting so much that he enjoyed losing to someone of Hoyce Gracie.
With the semifinal round set, Kilmeade updates the audience on who remains and reminds everyone that a winner will be crowned before the event is over, and then gives the viewers a sweet flash of the pearly whites.
They don't come back next week. They don't come back tomorrow. They come back tonight. So after they win, the trick is to win, and to win as easy as possible.
Patrick Smith's arrogance is so overblown at this point, it's a wonder his head can even fit in the arena. That overconfidence is apparent to everyone looking on. I'm pretty sure it even temporarily turns Kilmeade into Porky Pig.
He's coming up that last fight.
For the first time so far, fans see a fight that really resembles a kickboxing match. Both fighters establish distance, trade a few warning shots, and stay on their feet throughout. Once Smith gets his hands on Rhodes, though, it's all over. A standing guillotine choke has the karate fighter bucking tradition and tapping out instead with his foot. Smith couldn't be more proud of himself and likely thinks he's unbeatable at this point. Jim Brown wisely disagrees.
What about the element of confidence, and when can it hurt you? When can it be overconfidence?
When you get with Gracie.
Before that theory can be tested, Royce still has one more fight. A grappler versus grappler match with Gracie severely outweighed and outsized by the young Dutchman. Speaking of young, Royce isn't very old either, although that really depends on who you ask.
He's about 28, 29 years old.
27 years old!
The two feel each other out, and without any real striking attempts, Gracie secures a takedown. He works for the lapel of the gi, and it isn't long before he's using it to choke out the big man, flying in the face of Ben Perry's expert commentary.
Remto's fine. I think I don't know, unless the pain here, unless he gets enough of it around.
He looks like he's in tremendous pain.
Yeah, he's tapped out.
A lot of respect is shown between the combatants after the fight. Gracie then exits the octagon, continuing to avoid post-fight interviews unlike the other winners. The commentators talk a bit about how dominant the Gracies are, and Perry gives an interesting piece of insight into their mindset.
Jim, how much do you weigh?
About 250.
That's big man. I weigh 148. If we're in a swimming pool at the same time, we're the same size. That's their theory on the ground.
Right here, despite Perry's Gracie bias being blatantly obvious all night, he starts trivializing the lifetime of training the Brazilian family has gone through, insinuating that you can just pick this stuff up on the weekends, and before long you'll be schooling Royce and the boys.
Can you learn enough in 6 months to be effective?
You can be very effective in 6 months. The best way to teach someone nothing is show them everything.
JB, rightfully so, calls this a bunch of baloney.
You can be a force against someone that's done it all their lives.
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
Oh, absolutely.
Without any further ado, the last two men remaining return to the octagon. Smith still looks relaxed, but that air of overconfidence seems to have faded. Meanwhile, Gracie isn't afraid of what's about to come, or anything else, really.
You put the devil on the other side, I'm gonna walk into fight.
Neither is quick to engage, but when they do, Gracie hangs on tight and eventually gets the takedown. Smith tries to trap his left leg, but Gracie moves to mount pretty easily. Smith attempts a headlock from the bottom, and as a bit of a surprise, Royce switches to strikes and starts filling in Pat's face. After one or two shots gets through, Smith figures, meh, second place is good enough, and taps while pleading for mercy. A stark contrast to when he was tapped out by Shamrock in UFC 1, Smith shows respect for the master, hugging him and even raising his hand in victory. Brown teases Perry for his earlier comments, and Perry does what he does best, changes his story and pretends he was right all along.
6 months could not deal with a lifetime of training, 65 years. The Gracie family.
That's absolutely true, Jim.
The only thing left to do now is finally secure an interview with the champ, and Herb Perez is on the case.
Royce, it was a wonderful match. You did a terrific job again. You did it twice. You're the ultimate warrior once again, the ultimate champion. What do you think about that?
Excuse me?
After a shaky start, the interview goes pretty smoothly. Gracie says the competition was no walk in the park and praises his brothers and training partners. He calls out the guys in the magazines who say they're tough but don't show up and hopes the field will be even more difficult at UFC 3. It's then capped off by Perez making a slightly bold prediction.
And it looks like you're going to do it from now until forever.
Kilmeade takes the reins one last time to wind things down and ensures no one working on the broadcast feels underappreciated.
And so many people who don't get seen behind the scenes did such a tremendous job sweating in the truck, although they do get catered food.
And just like that, the Ultimate Fighting Championship is 2 events old. Already you can start to see a shift in how the fighters are training for such an event, understanding that without a ground game, they'll be fish out of water against a grappler. Another noticeable difference is the introduction of Big John McCarthy serving as referee. who even this early on seems aware and in control, adding a level of safety to what was still at times a brutal and barbaric contest. Although the transition away from mixing martial arts disciplines and into mixed martial arts has begun, it would still be some time before the evolution would be complete. Just like the original, UFC 2 is a real eye-opener, and perhaps just as worthwhile of a watch. If you can tune out Ben Perry acting like he knows everything, and Brian Kilmeade acting like an on-again, off-again goof, then it's actually pretty enjoyable. And once again, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, because as in the words of the great Brian Kilmeade himself,
There'll be another.